Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson, and if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate the show. That helps people to discover it on Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, and it's also on Rumble. Enjoy the episode.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
Well, thanks, Gus.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, good to see you again. I met you for the first time a couple nights ago and
Yeah.
heard about you for 3 years now through your fiance and kept hearing how much of an amazing guy you were. And I couldn't assume any different because your fiance is amazing. We became friends. And so anyway, it'll be cool to get to know you here today
for sure.
and share some of your journey with people. So 22 years in the service.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
SEAL Team 6, correct?
Correct.
And that for outsiders listening in, a lot of people that are not in the military probably don't know exactly what that means. But as a humble servant of our country, can you just describe a little bit about the difference between a Special Forces Navy SEAL and what the tiers mean inside of the SEALs?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people have this idea. People know about SEAL training. It's this very rigorous 6-month selection process. 80% of people don't make it. What they don't realize is that after you get through that, you go to a regular SEAL team, one of the what we call either the white side teams or sometimes we call them the vanilla teams, the regular teams. And those are, on the East Coast, you have the even numbered teams, so 2, 4, 8, and 10. On the West Coast, you have 1, 3, 5, and 7. There's no SEAL Team 9, and then there's Naval Special Warfare Development Group, also known as SEAL Team 6, which is on the East Coast as well. So after you do 5 years or 2 combat deployments at a regular SEAL team, you have an opportunity to get selected and go to Naval Special Warfare Development Group, in which case you go through another similarly rigorous 6-month selection process to get selected for that unit, which we call a Tier 1 unit. It would be sort of the Navy's counterpart to the Delta Force for the Army.
Wow.
So those would be your Tier 1 national mission units.
So it's the elite of the elite.
That's what we say. Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I did get to meet Jim Smith, who I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah, Jim, yeah.
Very cool guy, Delta Force, and it was new to me to start learning about what that even means. And it's pretty crazy what you guys have to do to get to that tier.
And it's fascinating now, having been through this career and getting to work with those guys and then meeting guys like Jim Smith and guys that were in, he was in Black Hawk Down in Mogadishu in 1993, and getting to meet some of those other people who were involved in that and seeing, prior to me being in the military, I saw the movie Black Hawk Down, and I remember thinking it was just so fast paced and so much going on, and how do you keep track of who's who and all these different things?
Yeah.
And then years later, after a career in the service, it's like, I go back and watch that movie and have been on operations that were not as chaotic, I think, as that. But sort of understanding the dynamic of all of the things that are going on the ground and exactly what those guys went through during those experiences, and now getting to see them. Jim's a few years older, obviously, than me, and getting to see him and talk about his experiences and some of the things that he went through, and then sort of post-career, how was life for him afterwards and for those people. And I think we have a lot of resources available to us now because of the things that those guys went through, and then how their careers kind of shaped up after that. And then when they got out and the things that they were going through, that have sort of resulted in us creating a better system for veterans who transition out, and understanding all of the things that go with the mental health component of a career in service in these high, national mission units.
Yeah, thank God for that, because I feel like that's how I met your fiance, is because she's been heavily involved with helping veterans, first responders, different folks with different therapies and integration processes, and it's becoming more normalized. Whereas before, with his generation and everybody before that, it was almost stigmatized to speak about that whole process. And now there's a common conversation about it. And it's almost even going the other direction, it seems, in my opinion, because there's a lot of businesses and incentives being driven inside of that, which we can get into. But sometimes you can see that the integrity line gets pushed into the money line, and then boxes need to be checked, and it gets really interesting. You probably have a great insight to that, as to why some guys can be 22 years in the service at the highest level, deployed, crazy missions, which I'd love to hear a little bit about, and why you're so resilient and what makes you so resilient, and able to come back and then also start doing what you're doing now with this Community First project, which we can get into. And then other guys maybe never even get deployed or go into the service and come out, and they have such a hard time. And I just don't understand, and I don't think it's understandable to a degree, but you probably can speak to it better than anyone from the inside looking out.
Yeah, it's tough, and I try to avoid the generalities of saying, well, this person or this group or this individual processes things differently. I think a lot of it is about the story that we tell ourselves about our experience and the things that we went through, and sort of how we frame that. And I think there is, and you know, I've heard it in different contexts, but there's this idea of, you were a service member for a certain amount of time, and you did this job and you did these things. Ergo, you have suffered these mental torments, and you know, you PTSD and traumatic brain injury and all these different things. And your narrative is now, as you transition out, they sort of cast this light as like you're a victim. You've been through these things, and here you've suffered, and we know you've gone through this, and let me tell you about all the negativity you should be experiencing. And I do think to some extent people embrace that, and they're like, oh yeah, maybe I am traumatized. Maybe I have suffered all these things. And if you embrace that identity, whether you were on a ship or whether you were at a forward operating base and you never left the wire, or maybe you've never even deployed overseas, and these people come out of 4 years or 6 years of military service, and they're like, oh, you were in from 2004 to 2010 without even knowing what you did. Maybe necessarily they're like, you have PTSD and you've suffered, and you're a veteran, so you probably have this, and that, and let us give you anti-anxiety medication, and let us give you this, and let us give you that, and let us tell you how you should be processing this. And then I think other people that I know, people that I've seen, and myself included, you go through some really hard, challenging things, and you lose friends along the way, and you're in combat operations, sometimes hundreds of combat operations and gunfights and these different things. But the story you tell yourself is, or for me, I knew the job that I signed up to do. I knew why I was going overseas. I had a very clearly defined purpose in my mind. And then coming out the other end of those experiences, you know, for me, it's just like, this is life. We go through hardships, we go through trials, we go through obstacles. And I'm a firm subscriber in the sort of the Stoic values of, you know, believing like memento mori, everybody dies, and amor fati, like embrace fate. The things that happen to you in life, for better or for worse, we embrace those things, and then take negativity and the positivity. You know, those things serve us, they build us, they make us who we are. And so if you have a chance to process something negative in a positive way and sort of onboard that experience and say, what can I take out of this that was good? Was sort of finding the silver lining. And that's not to say that there isn't some sort of, you know, mental or emotional, psychological hangover from those things. I think certainly there is. But if you don't subscribe to the narrative that you should be a victim, that you're helpless to overcome those things, I think that helps you move past that and just understand that, you know, that's life. And really, like, you know, I did 15 deployments during my time in the teams, and most of those were combat deployments and hundreds of combat operations. But I also understand, like, I wasn't fighting in the trenches of World War I. You know, I wasn't fighting in the Chosin Valley of Korea and those kind of things. The war that I fought, I feel like, in a lot of ways was maybe easier than, say, World War II or Vietnam or Korea or some of those. And so, yeah, even though the suffering that we go through mentally, emotionally, psychologically, it's there. But I think a lot of times we're doing service members a disservice by telling them, hey, you're a victim now, instead of telling them, like, hey, here's some tools and some things that you can do to stay connected to community, to find people who are going to support you. And for me personally, like, staying connected to guys that I served with, sharing those experiences, finding, you know, as my career dovetailed into transitioning from the military to the civilian side, finding a purpose to continue giving back and sort of embracing gratitude and understanding the challenges I went through, why I went through them, and the fact that those can be constructive instead of destructive. And so I think you know, you talked about destigmatizing, right? And I think there is this mindset now of, we have so many service members transitioning, and rather than just telling them all, giving them this blanket diagnosis of, you probably have PTSD, your war is over, let us medicate you and just put you out to pasture, saying, connect with community, find people with shared experiences, embrace the things that you went through, and find a way to share those experiences with other people to talk about overcoming hardships. Find a mission that you can continue with, which is, like you mentioned, Community First Project. As I transitioned out of the military, I had this 22 years of experience, combat operations and gunfights and all these different things. And I thought, here's a way for me to sort of give back to domestic law enforcement with the skills and talents and tactics and things that we had trained, and say, here's a thing that I can do. I can come back and sort of help train law enforcement brothers and people here at home. And that way it's not just 22 years of skills that you accrue. And then you come back and you're like, well, I'm not going to use that anymore. And I think whether it's law enforcement or first responders or military, I think you find that as people are approaching the end of their career, they sort of fall off this cliff of, I lose my identity when I leave the military, I lose my sense of purpose, and I lose my community. And I think that has a tendency to sort of accentuate or exacerbate sort of whatever the negativity was that you're still carrying with you from your time in service. If you then go just fall off this emotional cliff of losing identity, community, and purpose, I think then you really find people who find themselves in a bad situation because now they're home. They have a ton of time on their hands. They don't have anybody to connect with or really anything productive to do. And that sort of starts that, downward emotional and mental spiral.
And not to compare your field with ours, but first responders, same thing. We have a lot of camaraderie and we see a lot of weird stuff and it's exciting. And I've seen a lot of guys that go through it, and then when they leave, their identity, they didn't even know their identity was rep. It's just part of the culture. But you become a little bit hopeless or meaningless if you don't start to find ways to connect with others. And I've also seen people that don't even finish a 5 or 10-year career because of the narratives that are being handed to them early on. And I think that's the problem with the incentivization structure now, is it's driven for, well, you shouldn't have to see that drowning, or you shouldn't. And it's like, well, actually, I was lucky to be on that call and to have an impact or whatever it is. And so that narrative structure that you seem to have, do you think you got that from like grandfather, from your childhood, or where did this all begin? This resilience, like even going into the SEALs, you don't show up and expect them to make you resilient. I've heard you say this. You are resilient already. Otherwise, you're just going to not make it through buds.
Yeah, that's actually a fascinating question, and I've gotten that question from a number of people. Do you teach resiliency at buds? And to some extent they do. They teach some, autonomic regulation, some breathing exercises when you're in these intense moments of stress, for first responders too, right? How to do some breathing and mindfulness that's going to sort of like down regulate yourself back into, from fight or flight back into rest and digest, from the sympathetic to parasympathetic. But ultimately for us going through SEAL training, I think if you don't show up with that resiliency about 90% in place, you don't make it through the training. You don't make it long enough for them to start teaching you the resiliency mechanisms, because the really hard part of SEAL training, of basic underwater demolition SEAL school, is the first like 4 weeks. And so it's that time when they're really hammering down on you, and you already have to have those resiliency mechanisms in place, or at least have some semblance of an idea of what you're doing there, what your purpose is, why you're there. And that helps you sort of navigate that. For me, I think a lot of it started, I grew up, my father was a psychologist. And so, we grew up sort of, me and my brother and sisters grew up with this idea of like, here's what resiliency is. Here's why we do hard things. Here's why we challenge ourselves. And we didn't know maybe all the science behind it. But certainly those ideas were reinforced by my father as we were growing up, of like, when you fall down, if you fall down 9 times, you pick yourself up 10, and you dust yourself off and you keep moving forward. And then, my grandfathers, both of them fought in World War II, and they came home, and I don't think I never heard either of my grandfathers complain about anything ever.
Wow. And
certainly they had reason to complain. They fought in this very extremely difficult war, came home at a time, both of them lived through the Great Depression and all these things. My father's father was an immigrant. His family immigrated from Finland, so English wasn't even his first language when they came over, And I had this example of them having gone through all of this hardship. Neither of them were college graduates. And so they'd gone through a very difficult upbringing and young life. And then they had, bore their children along the way, and they worked these very blue collar jobs, and they scrimped and saved, and they did these things and never complained about it. And so you have this example of these people who were like, who had all the reason in the world to complain by today's standards, and never did. And it was just that, to me, is just the model of resilience. Of just like, we fall down, we pick ourselves up, we go through hardship. The obstacle is the way, whatever the objective that I want to achieve is on the other side of this hard thing. How do I get through that? And nobody was asking for a handout, and nobody expected anybody to give them anything for free. It's just like we carve our lives out the way that we want to. And, and if somebody helps you along the way, that's great. But the expectation is just that, the idea of that, like, nobody's coming to rescue us. It's up to us. Expect to self-rescue,
I think it's amazing. And I think that's one of the things I am concerned about with the newer generation, is that we've had such a giant heap of easy times, and we've all been conditioned by our culture, consumerism, whatever it is, that we're victims. And you're seeing this with a younger culture coming up, and they're entitled, and it's not even their fault. They inherited this narrative that, like, everything's easy and that you shouldn't have to experience hardship, and it's going to create problems, and it already is creating problems. And when you look at the centenarians and the people that live to be over 100, they lived through the hardest times, and they had the best attitudes. And so it does show you that that Stoic philosophy, or that Lōgos therapy, that component of narrative, is what drives humanity. Like, so much of it is mind, as much as people want to say, yes, it's body and nervous system, and we need to do the work there. Of course, we all have grief. But man, I think that victim narrative, it's such a fascinating subject to me, because I almost feel like victimhood versus opportunity and gratitude are the complete spectrum of the two decisions you get in all things forever. And people like yourself that go through what you've been through in your life already, and you're probably expecting more. You're always like, you're probably looking at the next summit. You're not like, oh, we made it. Let's just kick our shoes off and relax. You're looking for another way to serve, and you probably expect things to get a little bit shaky in the future, not getting easier. Whereas other people are going, oh, great, we've made it. So what do you think about, like, when you grew up, you saw your grandfather, you saw your father, you had this download. Do you think that someone in the same household could also subscribe to victimhood? Because we've seen that too with, like, twin studies. And it's interesting how sometimes nature nurture studies show that inherently. Do you think you come from a long lineage of warriors or something, and that you were born with an essence of that as well? I'm always fascinated with, like, where do we come from, and how much of you, yes, your environment, and thank God you had a good upbringing, it sounds like, but you were probably quite a resilient little dude. And you see this in children. And what do you think of that?
So it's hard to say generationally. I was raised LDS, so we were Mormon. The LDS community is big into genealogy, so we've traced our genealogy back. So I do know that there is way back, there is some Viking lineage and Scandinavians that came over to France and inhabited France for a while, and those kind of things. It's all cool to know that. And I think the more you know yourself, the more you can kind of that becomes part of this narrative of, like, oh, I have this lineage of these warriors and people, my grandfather and aunts and uncles and cousins who fought in these different wars and conflicts. Then that gives you a sense of, like, I'm going to continue that legacy because I'm proud of my heritage. I think from the sense of resiliency that I've developed in myself, I don't know how much of that is ancestral, that's passed down. I think that, I'm one of 5 children, and I think that all of them are very resilient in their struggles and trials that they've gone through. And, but for me personally, I think a lot of that resiliency was developed in, high school and middle school athletics, going through, I played football, I wrestled, I was a swimmer in high school. Then you go through these really challenging practices and these, difficult days, and these, 2 days for football, and these long, hard wrestling practices and stuff like that, swim practices. And you build up, this narrative of, like, I'm not going to quit. I'm never going to quit, no matter how hard it gets. Like, you go through these challenges in your own life, and maybe some of that is generationally passed down from my ancestors, who it may have been super, super tough, but a lot of it is, like, you have to create that within yourself generationally. Yes, maybe some people are more predisposed to it, but every person, I think, individually has to create that sense of, this is who I am. This is my tolerance for difficulty, my tolerance for hardship. This is how much I bounce back. And this idea of that, like, the hardships in my own life, I'm not going to let them keep me down. And some of that, I think, is is that Lōgos mindset of like, here's how I rationalize the things that I'm going through. Here's the internal narrative that I tell myself about who I am and how I come through this obstacle. And if you're the kind of person who says, I show up in this very challenging environment, this very challenging experience, I'm the kind of person who makes it through this, who overcomes this, who perseveres and comes through stronger on the other side.
Yeah.
And if that's the story that you have in your own mind that you tell yourself, I think then that becomes self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yep.
And the equal and opposite is true.
Yeah.
If you tell yourself, well, shoot, I'm not a very resilient person, I'm not all that tough, I've failed in challenging situations before, I'm probably not going to make it through this. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
You know,
it reminds me of that Jonathan Haidt, The Coddling of the American Mind, and
Great
some
book.
of the other sociologists and psychologists studies that go, yeah, look at what we're doing to children by giving everyone a trophy. Or it just, as nice as that sounds, you're actually causing harm. Because competition is part of it too. Like when you're playing sports, that's what you want to do, is win because you did something and you took personal responsibility. And I think the best teachers live by example. And so you doing it is the teaching. It's like, I went through this, and each day you're sort of living example of it. It's not like you're going out and doing what a lot of these people do now, where they're Instagram coaches and they're life coaches or self-promoters, but then you go to their house and they're sort of not doing too great. But there's a lot of that going on, a lot of self-promotion. And I've noticed some of my favorite people, there's a guy at work that played in the NFL for 7 years, and he's like if he went into the SEALs, I bet in his younger years, if he put his energy into that, he probably would have kicked some ass and done some good in that direction. Pretty much anything he would have done, he'd kick ass with. But that guy is the humble guy that wants to help everybody else. And it seems like with the SEALs, you guys are all about being of service and looking outwardly at like, what can I do to be of service, not the self-fulfillment, the self-orientation. And so what got you into it? I heard it was 9/11 because you were a young man at the time.
Yeah. So 9/11 certainly was the catalyst for me to join. And it's, it was never really on my horizon. I think I had done some service prior to coming into the military as a missionary. Obviously, that's a very different vein of service.
Yeah.
But I lived in Brazil for 2 years as a missionary for the Mormon Church, and loved that experience. Loved serving the people. Being a missionary is about proselytizing, but it is also about serving in the communities that you're down with, and the idea of like loving the people that you're engaging with, and this idea of like building these communities and helping out. And so that resonated with me. And then I came home from Brazil with this very renewed idea of just how amazing life in the United States is. And it really is, for anybody who's listening that hasn't lived abroad or hasn't really traveled abroad or spent any time in third world countries or impoverished countries. Do yourself a favor, at least go take a visit to some of these South American countries or Middle Eastern countries, African countries, and see what life is like in other places. And I submit to you that you'll come back with sort of a renewed sense of, you know what, even if I thought America was pretty great before, it really is, the land of opportunity, a place where you can rise above your circumstances, no matter what situation you're born into. You really can, better yourself. And a lot of countries, there just isn't that opportunity. So I came home from Brazil in 2000 thinking, man, I loved America before, but I really think we live in the greatest country at the greatest time in history.
Wow.
Not just the greatest country in the world, but the greatest country in the history of the world. The most opportunistic, the most, readily available opportunity, the most, I think, financial opportunity, job opportunity, career opportunity, educational opportunity. And sort of riding that high of this sort of patriotic exuberance is when 9/11 happened. And I remember in those days, I was in college at the time, and I was getting ready to go back for the fall semester. And I just remember thinking, like, I just feel like I can't just go back to school and be good doing nothing. I'm just being like, well, I'm just going to go back to school and pick up my classes where I left off. I really felt like I needed to do something more. And so in the weeks after 9/11, I thought, well, I could do this or I could do that. I wrote a letter to President Bush at the time and just kind of like expressed support for whatever action he felt like we needed to take. And I remember thinking, like, there has to be more I can do. There has to be more. And probably 3 weeks after 9/11, I just was like, I have to join. I have to join the military. I have to do something. And I had a cousin who was a Marine during Desert Storm. And so I called him, and he's actually a cop in Texas now. as on the line of service continues, right?
Yeah, that's cool.
But I called him and I was like, here's what I think, and what do you think about this? And he said, I think you should look into special forces. I think, maybe think about trying out for, do something to set yourself apart. And so that was sort of the catalyst for the whole thing. And, I thought, and like I said, I was a swimmer in high school. And so it seemed like there was a good fit there as far as like having the aquatic background of being a good swimmer and being able to do some of these things that I really thought would come in handy in the SEAL teams. Right.
Yeah.
And, so that was it. So I guess I signed on the dotted line. I signed a SEAL Challenge contract about a month after 9/11. And early 2002, I was in boot camp.
That's amazing.
Yep.
So when you go to sign up to be a SEAL instead of typical military, how do they weed you out right away to make sure that you have to be pretty intelligent. There's got to be some checks and balances there right off the gate.
Yeah. So you do the normal ASVAB test that all the high school kids do, right? The Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, ASVAB. And you have to score in, I think it's something like the 70th percentile or 65th percentile. So you have to be, I guess you have to score better than 2/3 of the people that take that test.
Okay.
And then there's a physical test too, that you have to come in. You have to do a certain amount of dead hang pull-ups, and you have to run 1.5 miles, and I think it's under 11 minutes, and push-ups and sit-ups, and there's a swim. So there's this whole physical component, and you have to meet the minimum standard just to get an opportunity to go to SEAL training.
Got it.
So you have to do this physical test, and then you have to score on the ASVAB. And then following that, then you go to boot camp. Through boot camp, you have an opportunity to go do like special programs, PT, to get ready, kind of to go into BUDS. And then when I came in 2002, it was structured a little bit different. You had to have a job. You had to actually have like a job in the Navy, what we call a rate. And you had to choose that rate. Then you had to go to that school, that technical school. So I went for sonar tech, and I was there for 10 weeks. And the idea being like, we're going to give them a job. And then that way the guys go, and the 80% that wash out of SEAL training will have a function ready made for them in the Navy. In about 2008, they switched that. And they took away, you didn't have to have another job. You could come in, go to boot camp, and go straight to BUDS. And so they sort of streamlined the process. They made SEAL a rating in the Navy. So SEAL was its own job instead of being sort of a collateral duty. So it has changed a little bit, but yeah, there is a very high standard of both mental aptitude and physical aptitude just to have an opportunity to go to this training. The 80% of people don't make it.
80%. I was wondering what the percentage is.
Yeah, it's about 80%.
80. And that's always sort of been that way, that trend.
Yeah, I think it probably in the early days of SEAL training, it was probably harder because people didn't know what they were getting into, and it was very challenging. And I don't think it's much more scientific now than it would have been in the 80s and early 90s. I think they've really whittled down how much do we have to crush these guys to get the product that we're looking for.
Yeah. Without liability.
Without too many people like dying in training.
Yeah. Does that happen common in BUDS?
Not common. It does, unfortunately, it does happen.
Like
it's
drowning
happened a couple of times. I think there was a drowning. A couple classes before me, there was a kid had died on the pool deck from swimmer-induced pulmonary edema. So he had fluid in his lungs, and they weren't able to catch that. So I think, and I would be hard-pressed to tell you all of the deaths that ever happened in SEAL training.
Yeah.
But it does happen, and it is a very physically challenging training block.
Yeah. Was it harder than you thought it was going to be? I mean, you probably can't even imagine.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
It's like you say it's the hardest thing that I've ever done, but your only metric for the hardest thing you've ever done before that was like maybe a 2-hour wrestling practice or something, which wrestling practices are super hard.
Right.
And, but wrestling practice is like your 2 hours is over and you go home and you rest up and you eat and you come back the next day and you go to school. BUDS, I guess sort of the hardest moment of BUDS is Hell Week, where you're 5 days with no sleep.
God.
And you're like running, carrying boats, carrying logs, and you're in, freezing waters until you're hypothermic, and then they pull everybody out, and then you're running down the beach and you're doing bear crawls and all these crazy things, buddy carries and all this, and you're awake. Essentially, you're going physically as hard as you can for 5 days.
Wow.
And then on the third day, you get like an hour of sleep. and then you go for another 24 hours and you get an hour of sleep on the 4th day, and then you go until you finish.
And they're encouraging you to quit, right?
The whole time they are like in your ear, and not just encouraging you to quit. They're picking out every little default, every little weakness, if you're not good at swimming, if you haven't been one of the, top guys in the swims that we do every Monday, you do a 2 mile, or every Tuesday you do a 2 mile ocean swim.
Damn.
So if your ocean swim times aren't great, Hell Week rolls around and they're going to find you during Hell Week and they're going to be like, hey, look, you're already not doing great on the swims. We're probably going to drop you anyway.
Wow.
So are you going to go through this 5 days of torture and,
wow,
running and just beating your body to a bloody pulp?
Yeah.
Just so that on the other side of this, we can drop you, because we're going to drop you. And they really are very convincing with their, but what they want to see is like, where is your mental resiliency at?
Yeah.
And so, everybody I think goes through that during Hell Week. And for me, it was, the mindset was when they were coming to me and they were saying like, I wasn't great at the obstacle course. And so they're coming to me and they're like, hey, you suck at the obstacle course and you're going to fail it anyway. You might as well just quit. You're going to be beat up after Hell Week. Your times are going to be even worse than they are now. And we're just going to drop you. But my mindset was, I'm going to make you show me that you're going to do, like, I'm going to get through this and I'm going to make you drop me.
Wow.
It's not going to be me that chooses to voluntarily go away from this program. I'm going to make you tear me off this beach kicking and screaming.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the mindset that you have to have. And you see people who are, they put you in the water for the surf torture, where they lay everybody down, your arms are locked and the waves are breaking over your face. And it's 2 a.m. and all you have on are these like neoprene tri shorts. And so you're cold and it's windy. And then they'll stand outside of the surf and they'll say, hey, all we need is one quitter. If we can get one quitter, we'll secure this evolution. We'll pull everybody out of the water. We'll get you guys, put your dry clothes back on, and we'll continue whatever we were doing. And so there's always a couple of people sitting there and they're like, I already don't want to be here. And I can really do my class a solid by being the one guy that quits and getting everybody secured or whatever. And then they start telling you like, we got hot coffee and donuts in the truck. We'll put you in a warm blanket. You could sleep in your own bed tonight.
Jeez.
And all of that mental stuff that you're already kind of like, it's in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
All starts coming forward. And it really makes you question, like, how bad do I want this?
Yeah.
How much am I willing to withstand all of this? And to the point where, my buds class started with 179 people. And of those 179, 25 of us graduated.
Wow.
So
they're crazy.
Not many.
Yeah. And do a lot of guys get to that end point, not make it, and then go back through buds and make it? Does that ever happen?
I would say not a lot. And I think it's more rare now. It used to be that you would have guys who would go to buds, they would quit during Hell Week, or they would have an injury. They would go do a year or two in the Fleet Navy, and then they would have an opportunity to come back. I think that's more rare now because, following 9/11 and all of the people that came in post 9/11, there's a lot more information out there. There's a lot more publicity. There's people doing podcasts and people writing books and people on Fox News and people making TV shows. And so there's a lot more demand for people coming in, and people know the standard and they know what's required of them. And so I think if you looked at the kids that are coming in now, the PT numbers are probably better and they're, they're faster and they're maybe more fit and they're better prepared.
Cool.
Because there's more information out there. But from a mental toughness standpoint, and this is something we talk about, my buds class had at least 4 or 5 fleet returnees come back who had failed bud once, came back, got back into a SEAL training class and made it through the second time. And some of them, were maybe not the most physically gifted guys, but from a mental resiliency and a toughness standpoint, they made it through. And a lot of those guys I was able to keep track of through my whole career. And I still am in touch with some of those guys. And knowing what I know now, it's like, I wonder if you lose some of the guys that are more mentally tough, but not as physically capable.
Right.
There's just that like trade-off. It's hard to say.
Yeah. I'm curious, like in buds, do you stay friends with those guys, or do you guys branch off after buds and you become closer with like your comrades that you go to battle with and are on missions with?
So there's a little bit of both. I like my buds class, I kind of lost touch with everybody. Guys went to the West Coast, guys went to the East Coast, guys kind of went their separate ways. Towards the end of my career, a couple of the guys that I had sort of kept in touch with, we put together like a text thread with everybody, we, sort of got everybody's numbers that we still had.
Mm-hmm.
Who has this guy's number? Who has this guy's number? And we put together a text thread of just like, let's reconnect everybody. Guys that got out after 4 years or 6 years, guys that stayed in, guys that did 20 years, and just kind of see where everybody's at. Again, with that sense of community, especially as guys that stayed active are now getting ready to end their careers, you sort of find yourself craving that sense of community. Like, who am I going to stay connected with? And so I reconnected with a lot of those guys. But it's like the guys that I knew at my first team, you stay connected with some of those guys, and then some of those guys you don't. And then, when I got to Dev Group and the guys I was in the squadrons with there, some of those guys you form really strong friendships with.
Yeah.
And the guy who founded Community First Project, the nonprofit that I work for, he was a former squadron teammate of mine at Dev Group.
Okay.
And so we had about 10 years of work overlap there, good friends. And so when I got out and the job became available, I knew not only did I want to do the job, it was a mission that I really aligned with, but it was also a guy who I knew that I liked. I knew his work ethic. I knew he was like smart, hardworking, fun guy to be around. And so it's like that aligned. It just seemed to fit.
Yeah.
So, and then there's guys that I worked with for a few years here or there, and then they sort of go off and do their thing in life. But so there are people that I connected with through all phases. There's even people that I knew in boot camp who didn't go to SEAL training, that I just knew them for the 10 weeks in boot camp. And I still, stay in touch with some of those guys because you have that connection or whatever. And it's just, different people, I think, from different phases of life you stay connected with.
So when you get deployed, you had to get 2 deployments to get on the SEAL Team 6. When did you know that you wanted to go after that? And how hard was that process compared to BUDS, or if you can even compare the two? Because I don't know.
Yeah. So I would say, I knew after I had an opportunity to do a deployment with one of the Dev Group squadrons in 2007 and 2008. And following those deployments, I knew that was like, it was what I had thought being a SEAL was going to be when I was going through SEAL training.
Okay.
Like everything that I had imagined, all of the, the gear and the people that you get to work with and the missions that you get to do and all those kind of things. That was what I had thought when I was going through BUDS. I was like, this is what being a SEAL is like.
Cool.
And so I knew after doing those deployments that I wanted to do it. The process of getting there is, I think, physically almost as challenging as actually going through SEAL training. And then from like a tactical capability standpoint, the expectation of your performance is much higher. Whereas at BUDS, you kind of just have to survive.
Okay.
But when you're going through selection for Dev Group, it's you're expected to survive the physical part of it, but you're also expected to be a top performer amongst a class of 60 other top performers.
Got it.
So you're trying to outperform everybody, but be friends with everybody, make the standard, exceed the standard. And, and then there is a very like mental component of them, the selection and training cadre, sort of never letting you know that if you're doing well in the class or not. So you always kind of feel like you're on the cusp of getting dropped.
And what's the washout process of that? How many people fail or make it to that elite level?
It's probably about half.
Wow.
Probably about half of the guys who go into each selection and training class make it through.
Wow. So then you go through that, and it's probably grueling, and that lasts probably maybe 6 months or
6
something.
months, yeah, about.
And then you get on the SEAL Team 6. Now, are you with this particular group of folks for the rest of your time, or how does SEAL Teams? How many guys are in that region, or whatever you want to call that?
Yeah, so you're assigned to a squadron, and then you pretty much do the time that you're at the command is pretty much you stay consistently pretty much with one squadron.
And you did that for the rest of your career? You stayed in that squadron?
So that squadron for about 12 years.
Okay.
And then I went to one other squadron for the last 4 years.
So those guys you get really close with.
And those guys you get tight with. And those are the guys that you do, the majority of my deployments, the majority of the combat that I did, most of my career, essentially 15 and a half of my 22 years in the teams were done there. And so, you get, you get really tight with those guys, and it's because of that consistency, because there's not the turnover where even at the regular SEAL teams, there's always a new BUDS class of guys putting new guys into the team. So you have these guys coming just, super green right through, coming right out of BUDS, and they don't know anything, and they've never deployed. And you don't really have that at Dev Group. You have guys coming from the regular SEAL teams, and they're seasoned, and they already have a reputation as being good operators and stuff like that. So
it's like a mutual respect right off the bat.
Yeah, mutual respect right out of the gate, and there's a high expectation, but then there is a high, we always called it like big boy rules, where there's a lot's expected of you, but you're also given a lot of latitude, a lot of left and right limit to sort of operate within how you see, the best way you see to do things. Or like, here's problem X, here's your left and right limits, go solve it.
Yeah.
And I really like that, because I think it produces a sort of a culture of creative outside the box thinkers, of guys who are innovative, of, part of the reason we call it Naval Special Warfare Development Group is because we're constantly innovating and developing new tactics and new techniques and using new and different weapon systems and doing all these different kind of things. So you do get to be very creative, which, believe it or not, is not something that's reinforced much in the military, of outside the box thinking and creativity.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'd love to hear your perspective and the evolution of your thinking on the nature of war, and like what that looked like for you when you're a new guy and you're getting deployed versus looking back now and having gone over there how many times?
Yeah, like 15. Yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah. And like what your view is on the nature of war and what it entails, and what you lost friends, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. So you mind speaking to that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think or for me, at least when I came in, you have this idea of what conflict probably looks like, what warfare probably looks like. And I don't think it's that you necessarily go in with like a misconception about that war is like, we're just going to go kick the crap out of everybody and we're going to win every engagement. There is an idea that we have the upper hand, that especially when you're going to a place like Iraq or Afghanistan, where it's like outgunned, outmatched, outsmarted, outfinanced. It's a vastly inferior fighting force.
Okay.
And so there is this expectation that it's, we're just going to go kick the crap out of these people. And then you get over there and, before I had even deployed, one of my Bud's classmates was killed in combat.
And you're excited going at that point. Like, this is finally the
It was
time.
what I signed up to do.
Yeah, you're training, everything. You're almost like everybody's sort of going, this is our big moment.
Yeah, and it's kind of like you go through, like I said, I joined the military in 2002, and I didn't get to go on my first real combat deployment until 2005.
Okay.
So you've been in the military for 3 years, you've done all these things, and you're amped up to get to go do this thing.
Yeah.
Well, in the interim between, when I went through Buds and then got to do my first combat deployment, one of my friends went over in a deployment in 2004 and was killed in combat. And so it's this very sobering moment. I remember his name was Clark Schwedler. And he was a guy who was super funny, outgoing, personable, one of these guys that you kind of latch onto when you're going through Buds, just because he's this big personality. And love the dude. And so you hear about this, and he's in this operation that a handful of guys get shot up and survive, but he's killed, immediately there on target. And so you're like, oh, this is right. This is what I signed up to do. But also there is an element of like, anytime you go into a gunfight, even if the enemy is outmatched and outgunned and outtrained, bullets fly and people get hit and these things happen. Right. And so, and then in 2005, right around the time I did my first deployment, I was at SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 2 and Operation Red Wings happened. Wow. June 28th of 2005. And so one of my first really good friends at my first team was a guy named Danny Dietz, who was on the ground during Operation Red Wings. And for those who aren't familiar, Operation Red Wings was the lone survivor incident. Marcus Luttrell was the only guy who survived on the ground. And even the quick reaction force that came to sort of try and pull those guys out, their helicopter got shot down. So it was the largest loss of life in Naval Special Warfare history up until that point. And a lot of guys and it was, again, one of those moments where you're like, holy cow, like this is real. And these guys had gone in to do this operation that was supposed to be a recon and surveillance and go target this individual. And it was going to be this thing that this is what we trained for. This is what we trained for.
Was that portrayed at all correct when you saw the movie or read the book? Compare it. I'm always curious.
I think just like with any movie, I think elements of it were portrayed correctly. I think it's hard to really get the full measure of everything that happened on the ground. I think some of it was probably misconstrued or over Hollywoodized. But I wasn't on the operation, so it's hard to know fully. But I do know, Danny Dietz had been one of the first guys that when I showed up and checked into SDV Team Two, he was from Littleton, Colorado. I grew up in Grand Junction. And so he took me under his wing. He's like, I know we're going to be boys because we're both from Colorado. And was just a really, really nice guy, a mentor. A true warrior. The guy was one of the best guys that I knew at the team. And so when he was killed, it was really like, again, that second sort of gut punch of like, this is a dangerous job.
Yeah.
And so you sort of start reframing in your mind, you talk about the evolution of how I think of combat, and it's like, okay, there's, a component of this that even no matter how well you train, or even if you're with one of the nation's premier fighting units, whether that's Rangers or SEALs or Green Berets or whoever, there's, in a fight, the enemy gets a vote.
Yeah.
And there is a very real possibility that, you might even be on a helicopter that's flying in to put you into combat, and then that helicopter gets shot down and you didn't even get to fire a shot.
Yeah.
So that aspect of it was very sobering. And I think you find yourself at these crossroads moments where you're, and probably same thing with being a firefighter or a cop or whatever, where your first time that you get into a certain situation, or the first time that you're responding to, a tragic car accident where a family with small kids has been killed or something, you see that, you start thinking to yourself, do I really want to do this job? Like, I know why I signed up. I know why I came in. I understand what my mindset was, behind 9/11 and all those kind of things. But like, how much do I still want to be here? How much do I want to still keep doing this? And we compare it to like when you're going through SEAL training and somebody that maybe you're really good friends with when you go into SEAL training, and then that person quits.
Yeah.
It takes something out of you. It takes a little bit of your desire to be there, because maybe emotionally you kind of hitch your wagon to that person a little bit, and you say, this person, me and this guy, we're in it to win it, right?
Yeah.
We're going to do or die, me and this guy.
Yeah.
And so then you lose a friend like Clark Schwedler, and then you lose a teammate like Danny Dietz, and you see this helicopter full of people get shot down. You go to these memorial services and you hear their widows speaking, and you go up to Arlington and you bury your friends, and you start thinking like, all right, like my why had really better be pretty strong, pretty clearly defined, or it's not going to get me through these moments, because they're hard moments. They take a lot of reflection, and they take a lot of sort of soul searching of like, how do I feel about this? And am I still okay to continue going forward? And
how did that evolve, your why? What was it that evolved looking back when you were a young man versus as you got 10 years in, 15 years in, you've been deployed all these times? What was it, the shift in the why?
Yeah, so I think the shift happened, I knew exactly why I came in, right? I was like, post 9/11, I wanted to go overseas and I wanted to take the fight to our nation's enemies. I was like, this is the first time since Pearl Harbor that we had been attacked on American soil. And in my mind, it was just an unacceptable thing, and we cannot let that happen again. And so I wanted to go forward and externally protect our nation. After the first few deployments, I think, and you go through some of these really trying times and some of these losses, and you go through combat and you go on these combat missions and you're fighting shoulder to shoulder with the guy next to you. And what really comes out is the reason that you're there, and the reason that you continue doing it is so that you can continue to bring your friends home, continue to bring the men home, continue to train and get better and execute these missions at a high level, but you're more doing it about the guy beside you.
So it narrows a little bit.
It definitely narrows.
Wow.
And you start to question as the years drag on. I think you start to question the political narrative a little bit. And
how does that feel as you evolve and see that? Because everyone starts to see through little things of the politics of war and the corruption.
The politics of war and the corruption. And then, excuse me.
Yeah. That's got to be the hardest part, I'd imagine. One of the hard, I don't know, but I'd imagine that'd be tough.
Well, and you have to see beyond the politics of it, because, my first 6 years, I guess, were under the Bush administration, which was the administration that I signed up for as the first president that I voted for in my lifetime. And then that transfers over to the Obama administration, and I didn't necessarily agree with the politics and didn't vote for Obama. And so I kind of was like, all right, well, let's see where this goes. We continued getting good missions. We continued getting tasked with doing these high level missions. And it was around, that time, 2009, that I came over to Dev Group, and we had a lot of success, and there were a lot of high profile missions that happened during that time frame. And so you're like, I can sort of divorce myself from what I think about the politics of the current administration and just look at, are we being successful? Am I still doing the job that I want to do with the people that I want to work with at a place that I want to be? Am I still helping to bring my friends home safely? Am I still doing the best job? Am I still doing the most good?
Yeah.
And so those are the things that I started looking at. And it like that carries you through the Obama administration and Trump 1 and then the Biden administration. Am I still doing the most good? And it really probably wasn't until, 2018, 2019 that I start looking at the strategic objectives of what we're doing. And we're still, I am continuing to lose friends and teammates in places that I didn't necessarily sign up to go fight. I never felt super attached to the conflict in Yemen, or I didn't feel like very motivated about the things that we were doing in Somalia, or I didn't feel like that was my war that I signed, if that makes sense. It didn't feel like that was my conflict. And so when I'm watching teammates die in Somalia and I'm thinking, what are we doing? Why are we still doing this? Am I still doing the most good? Do I still align with the strategic vision of our leaders? And then in 2020, 2021, I really felt like this precipitous drop off of that my goals, my vision, I guess my sort of ethics didn't really align with, I think, what we were doing. And it wasn't that I still didn't enjoy being in the military or still didn't like love working with the guys that I worked with, and was still wholeheartedly invested in the mission. But I sort of started feeling like this divergence of like, I don't necessarily feel like this is the place for me anymore. And I started seeing, around that time, my buddy had gotten out, preceded me in retirement, got out in 2020, and in 2022, he stood up Community First Project. And so I see these guys moving on and doing other things, guys who had been teammates of mine getting out and building businesses or going into some sort of philanthropic service, or guys got out and went into law enforcement, guys got out and went in, they were doing other things. And there were these very compelling opportunities on the outside. And so probably around 2022 was when I was like, I think it's time for me to move on. I had 2 years left on an existing contract. And I said, I think it's time for me to transition on to whatever's next.
Were a lot of your teammates at the exact same time feeling similarly that were in
so many?
Yeah.
The
quick pull out of Afghanistan and things like that. And
I think there were a couple of things. I think there was, the Afghanistan drawdown was, again,
awful.
like a gut punch. It was super disappointing to see a place that we had spent so much time and so much money and so much loss of life, personally, friends.
And it could have went much better, right? Just pulling out in a much more ethical, slow way. I mean, I don't know anything about that, but I can see geez, that didn't seem ethical at all.
I think it was a very political, like, I think the Biden administration had come in and they wanted a quick win. They wanted a quick headline win. Biden draws down Afghanistan, which is completely the wrong way to do it. I think probably in retrospect, the best time to do it would have been like 2012, when we had strategically fractured the Taliban to a point where they were a shadow of what they had been. The bin Laden raid happens in May of 2011. So he's sort of the last big name that we really were like looking. I mean, there was a handful of others, but he was the guy, right? And so those things happened. Taliban's fractured. The partner force, the surrogate force that we were working with there in Afghanistan, the Afghani partner unit, they were as strong as they were ever going to be. They were built up, and there was a lot of, like, I think, moral groundswell behind what they were doing. We felt like we were winning. And then over the next 10 years, we sort of just sat on that. We let the Taliban reconstitute. We went into these like verbal negotiations with the Taliban of like, they wanted to come to a bargaining table. The whole time they're just rebuilding their forces.
And when you say we, how do you feel about that? When you say we, how does that work in your view?
Well, when I'm saying we, I mean the greater U.S. military has sort of shifted their strategic objectives to starting to look for an exit strategy. But instead of saying like, now is a good time to turn this over, the exit strategy became, well, we have to build up and enable the partner force. But what they didn't realize, or I think maybe they did realize, but they just wanted to continue pouring money into this war machine, is that the Afghani partner force was never going to be more capable than they were right then.
Got it.
And I think that was borne out by just how fast the Taliban rolled over the Afghani partner unit when we pulled out. It was less than months.
Yeah.
Right. When we decided to do the strategic drawdown to when we were essentially like flying out of Bagram, like we flew out of Saigon in 69 or whatever, you know?
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, so, from the outside looking in, the military industrial complex, some of the nature of the corruption with the CIA and the good with both? You know, obviously you've been deeply embedded inside, and you don't have to speak on any of this, obviously, and to whatever degree you're allowed to or willing. But when you start to see it from an outsider like me, you know, I'm busy working as a firefighter, and then you hear little clips and versions, and you know, you do your best to try to understand the nature of the world, but it almost seems obvious that there's a problem with the military industrial complex and going to stay at perpetual war for the wrong reasons, maybe for a lot of money. But is that even completely or off course? Like, what do you think about all this when I say that?
Yeah, and this is just, again, this is just my perspective from what I've seen. I don't never worked at the Pentagon, have never worked in the highest ranks of the Joint Chiefs, was never worked really closely aligned, except for, you know, some outstation work in Afghanistan with anybody in the CIA. But you do see that there is, it seems like it goes way beyond strategic objectives. And it does get into the point where it's like, we're continuing to throw money and assets at this war because there continue to be companies, vendors, defense contracting companies that have a vested interest in putting money into these things. And those people are very tied into both politicians, certain lobbies, and then the high-ranking officials of within the, you know, the military or the CIA. And there's a lot of crossover between people who are high in the military that then cross over to be directors and deputy director of the CIA, or then go work in the Pentagon or work in politics and then come back to be, you know, Secretary of Defense or Secretary of the Navy. And it's very, like, if you look at how many of those people have just sort of bounced around into all of those, you know, Leon Panetta is the director of the CIA, and then he's also becomes the Secretary of Defense, and then bounces around to all these different positions. And it's very much like those interests that have a lot of money and contribute a lot to politics end up getting these contracts, and they're like, well, the contract doesn't make a lot of sense unless we're continuing to fight a war. So it's like we have these multi-billion or even, you know, $100 billion contracts with Lockheed and Raytheon and Halliburton and all these different companies. And like, but if we're giving them all this money, we need to have some reason to be using all of these assets, or else it doesn't make sense. And we want to scale back the defense budget. And so you look at that, and it's impossible not to see that it's like, from a strategic objective standpoint, we really didn't accomplish anything, any major victories, I would say, in Afghanistan following like 2011, 2012. So you're like, we were there for another almost 10 years, just putting money into continuing to train the partner force and continuing to do this and continuing to do that, money and guns and optics and all these different things, to the extent that we left something like $85 billion worth of equipment when we pulled out. Which, you know, if you had done it in a more like measured way and said, hey, we have a phase out plan where we're going to do this. Here's phase one, here's phase two, and we're going to retrograde this equipment, and we're going to enable the partner force, and we're going to do this. And maybe that's like a 4 or 5 year plan. But then we say, hey, this year of 2016, let's call it, hard stop. Hard stop, we're out of Afghanistan. Instead, it was just like they kept kicking it down the road and kicking it down the road and kicking it down the road. Biden administration comes in 2020, and they're like, we're going to get a moral victory. We're going to get a headline win here. We're going to pull all the last troops out of Afghanistan. And the way that it went down was catastrophically bad, like historically bad. And everybody's just kind of like, whoops. And then you don't see it. There was zero accountability from the position of like the Joint Chiefs. Nobody said, hey, the buck stops here. We messed this up. Everybody kind of like abdicates that responsibility and says, well, who could have foreseen this coming? And in the meantime, you ask the ground level guys from our unit or from Delta or from one of these other places, and they're like, well, I was training the Afghani partner unit in 2012, and I could have told you they're never going to be ready. So you might as well do it when the Taliban is fractured and weak, and the partner unit is as capable as they're ever going to be.
Wow.
And then let's say, hey, this is a good time to do this. Let's start looking at an exit strategy. And I don't know the dollar and cents amount of money that was spent between 2012 and 2020, but I have to guess it's close to $1 trillion.
Wow.
For what?
Yeah.
And that kind of thing it is very disappointing from my standpoint. But I also think you look at it, it's disappointing to know that somebody somewhere lined their bank account with that $1 trillion and didn't give two shits that when we left there, it just fell apart, imploded like a dying star.
And it breaks trust, so much
trust
and relationships, and it even sort of fragments people that are within, like yourself, that are starting to not feel as patriotic in that regard, as far as what your mission is. And it's got to be very complex. And then proxy wars and things like this, where I don't understand war to any degree, but it always just seems like we're funding, say Ukraine, and it's like, well, that means that we're at war with Russia in some degree. Some of this stuff just seems obvious. And then you're like, well, what do you do about that? What do you see as, because you're a pretty hopeful guy and you have a pretty inspirational message, which I do like. You're an optimist. And as long as you're breathing, you're going, hey, we're in this. And what do you see in the next 5 or 10 years? Like, is the Taliban exponentially now more powerful? What are our threats currently? And what do you see about the future of, if there's any hope?
Yeah.
What is the hope?
I think the hope rests in the American public's belief in American systems. So, and I say that, I know that seems pretty vague, but like you mentioned, like what really suffered through all of that stuff with me was the trust in the governmental systems and not my own patriotism. I'm one of these guys that still believes through and through that America, we're the last best hope. Like Ronald Reagan said back in the 80s, right? We're the last best hope. If America goes, there's nothing left. There's no place left that represents the values of a constitutional republic in the world besides us. We're sort of a light on a hill. That being said, we have to restore the public faith in those institutions. And the way that we do that is we have to restore those institutions to, and this is one of the things that I really like about, this is going to be a controversial take, I think, here, just because politics is so divided. One of the things that I really liked about the idea of like the Department of Government Efficiency, let's bring in an auditing organization that's going to tell you dollar for dollar, here's where your tax dollars are going. Here's how this money is being spent. Because I think people look at like the taxes that they pay, and every time you get a paycheck and you see your federal taxes, you're like, where is all this money going? And how am I contributing so much? And I still can't afford my health care, and I still can't afford my mortgage payment. And somehow the United States continues to rack up about $1 trillion worth of debt every 6 months. And like, where is that money going? So it's like restoring faith in the organizations. And then I think, the other thing that this administration did was they came in and immediately started turning off some of these proxy wars. And it's like Ukraine and Russia went away. We tried to broker a peace treaty between Israel and Gaza. We're trying to shut down. And there's a number of other conflicts worldwide that have been going on for years and years. The Trump administration steps in and says, hey, we're not going to do this anymore. And we're not going to tolerate that you guys are doing this anymore. And we're not going to continue funding this. And so you see these series of worldwide conflicts go away. And I think that one of the ways that you reinstill confidence or trust in the American people in some of these organizations is you have to have this radical transparency of like, what are these people doing? What's happening behind these closed doors? What is the CIA involved in? What is the FBI doing? Where are the Epstein files? Why does all my tax dollars go to pay all these people? And you have like, Kash Patel takes over the FBI and immediately fires a whole bunch of people. And you're like, good. It's clear to us that the FBI can function without these 6 layers of bureaucracy that are just bogging down that system. And then, you fire all these people and then you're like, so hold on, my tax dollars were paying thousands of 6-figure salaries for decades for people that I guess we didn't need even doing those jobs. And I know that is a simplification of the complexity of the things that go on in government. Some people are going to disagree with me, but I think the fact is people need to know what's happening with their tax dollars. People need to know what organizations are doing behind closed doors. And I understand the levels of classification and things, but be transparent with the people. Let's not fund proxy wars. Let's not throw billions of dollars at a war that seemingly our weapons and our money and our advise and assist capabilities going to both sides. You see that. You've probably seen that meme of I think it's a night sky over Gaza, and it's like rockets coming from this direction, rockets coming from this direction, and then it says my tax dollars, somehow also my tax dollars.
Yeah.
You're
you're funding both sides.
We're funding both sides. Yeah. And it's you cannot exist in a system that's like that, and you cannot continue to spend American tax dollars while American taxpayers suffer on wars that aren't ours, that don't really have a strategic interest.
Yeah.
And I think for too long we've been sold this idea that, well, we do have a strategic interest. Well, we should be funding, both Palestine and Israel. Well, we should be funding both, we're funding Ukraine while Germans and their green energy continue to buy Russian oil because you can't subsist on all green energy. And you're like, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And let's start doing things that are strategically do make more sense. And so I do think it's, like you said, I'm an optimist about the future of the country, but I think you have to have the upcoming generations understand the situation that we've been mired in for a long, long time. And then the changes that need to be made, starting with sort of a radical transparency and this idea of, America first for Americans first. Let's take care of the things that are going on, because Lord knows we're not without our problems here. And when I think about the strategic threat from a Taliban in Afghanistan or a Al-Qaeda in Iraq, I'm much, much less concerned about those things than I am about radicalized Islamic terrorists or drug runners coming in across our southern border. That to me is a much more pressing threat, because if we're not controlling what's happening at our own border, then why am I worried about what's happening thousands and thousands of miles away?
Yeah, it's very complex. And what do you think our biggest threat is, as far as you're saying right now, a couple of the items, but in order for this next generation to even have the idea or understanding of what the nature of the problem is, they would have to have the capacity to focus their attention on something. And I feel like right now we could name a whole list of reasons why this is, but there seems to be a magical narrative control happening where you're seeing the political divide and you're seeing ideological warfare happening like a level I've never seen, where when I grew up, you could talk to your neighbor and you didn't even know what their political beliefs were. And now we're so divided, and I'm an optimist as well. I'm like, hey, I'm grateful to be here. Let's figure this out. But I feel I'm a little concerned about the control of attention and the narrative control, the ability for propaganda to just be so powerful right now through social media. And you talk to people and they're very righteous about all these different things. And none of them really know what they're talking about. And there's a lack of humility and then a lack of attention to actually pull back and let's meet people on common ground and see where we can actually see what we do relate on and what we do agree on, which is, to me, it's like freedom and freedom of speech and certain things that we have to hold on to. And even my little podcast gets censored and pulled all the time for keywords. It's bullshit. And it's getting more and more ramped up to where narrative control is more powerful. So do you think that's one of the biggest threats, is freedom of speech and propaganda?
I think that's huge, because without freedom of speech, you're not going to have freedom of dissemination of information. And I'm a big advocate for freedom of speech, and I'll even be the first to tell you, I don't have to disagree with you to say that I defend your right to say sometimes idiotic things that people say. I'm like, yeah, you have a right to say those things.
That's how we know how you think.
That's how we know how you think. And it's also how you sort of sort through the noise of I would like to think that people have a mechanism to hear somebody who's saying something that's just objectively untrue and be like, yeah, that's observably untrue. I can look around my world and see that what you're saying is not in fact happening. But what happens is people, instead of going and living their lives out in the world and seeing the things that are happening and travel and see what's going on in other countries and see, what's going on in their own communities, people just go straight to their phone and they look and see what's being posted on social media, and they just assume that this is, this idea of what you see is all there is. Well, what I'm seeing on my phone, this must be the things that are really happening. And, one of the great things about being in the military was, whether it's for training domestically or deploying overseas, you get to see a lot of the things that are going on. You get to hear the opinions of a lot of people that are out there, and you get to see, some of the different things that are actually happening. And then, people are saying, well, what's actually going on out there? And I'm like, well, it's kind of a mix of some of the stuff that you're seeing on social media and some of the stuff that's just happening in real life. And then a lot of the stuff that you're seeing on social media just is objectively untrue.
Yeah.
It's just not actually happening the way that they're portraying it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that was, in the vein of remaining optimistic, I think that there was a big swing when Elon Musk bought Twitter, and the large scale, I think, censorship machine that you saw happening on Twitter, like one narrative was clearly being suppressed. And then immediately from one day to the next, it wasn't being, and everybody's like, oh, it was being suppressed. I can see now that all of this other side of the narrative that wasn't coming out before
and proven
and is now being, and then there's the running joke that it's like, I need new conspiracy theory because all mine came true.
Yeah.
All of these things that people were like, oh, you're way out of left field. You're, things that you're saying aren't true. And then the Twitter files come out and all these this information is actually uncensored and released. And people are like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
And so I think, like you said, it all starts with freedom of speech. You have to have both sides able to say the things that are really happening. I think one of the most frightening things that's happening now is with the advent of AI and some of like these deep fake things that are happening is becoming more and more believable.
Yep.
And pretty soon you're going to have the ability to, and I don't know what the right answer is here, but you're going to have the ability to essentially like make these videos of people doing and saying things that look real, that aren't real. And then you're going to be like, how do we sort through all of this? Do you put a watermark, like a mandatory watermark on AI videos so you can tell the difference between what's real and what's not?
Yeah.
Right now, many of them are hilarious.
Yeah.
The AI videos, they're good.
Thank God.
But
like at least they throw a little humor in them. Otherwise, you'd be like, was that real?
Yeah. Yeah. And some of them you do watch, and for a few seconds, you're like, wow, is Trump really saying that? And you're like, oh, no, this is an AI video of him clowning somebody. But I think those things are going to become harder and harder to discern what's real and what's not.
Yep.
And you already have a generation or two of people who live in that world of like, the information is really cloudy. I'm not sure what to make of this, or who's telling the truth, or what's true, or going back and reevaluating things that are decades old information and being like, was any of that true? I think it's now that the files have been released and unsealed and all that kind of stuff, and everybody pretty much there's so much craziness happening that pretty much everybody understands that the CIA killed JFK and nobody missed a beat.
Yeah.
They're just kind of like, yep, that happened. All right, moving on. And you're like, for years that was contested, and the Oliver Stone movie, and everybody kind of had this vague idea, but it was unfathomable that the government would kill a sitting president. And then it was like the files came out, and everybody's like, yeah, that happened.
Yep.
And now we have to sort of reevaluate, like, what other information was fed to us that probably wasn't true around, the Vietnam War, or the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, or all these different things that are based on political expediency. The whole American public swallowed a narrative that then you're like, well,
God,
I guess we were probably wrong about that.
Yeah. And what do you think about, are you willing to speak about your narrative on 9/11, which got you to go and have a whole career in the military? And it's what got you on board. And then you start to look back and go, well, the way to get people to be patriotic is to create events. Not saying I 100% know what happened, but I've had Kurt Weldon and other folks on, and it's like, whoa, that's messy.
There's a lot of information out there. This is what I'll say. There's a lot of information out there that makes you scratch your head. Yeah. And there's the whole Building 7 narrative and what was housed there. There's the whole, it certainly doesn't look like a plane was flown into the Pentagon and conveniently destroyed an area where some financial archives were housed. And so, you look at that stuff and you think, and I try not to think too much into it, because at the end of the day, whether it was all true or mostly true or some true, I got to have a tremendous career. I learned a ton. I developed in ways that I wouldn't have otherwise. I developed, tactical skills and leadership skills and public speaking skills, and this breadth of knowledge and this very extraordinary 22-year career that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah.
So if I'm just looking at the silver lining, for me, it was a net positive. You go through a lot of difficulty and a lot of hardship, but all that stuff kind of shapes you. But yeah, now at the end of 22 years, and now that tons of information is coming out about things that happened years and years ago, and you think, yeah, maybe that wasn't, I certainly don't see it the same way that I did in 2001 when it happened.
Yeah.
I don't regret a day having signed up or doing any of those kind of things, but there is an outlook on it now that I'm like, I swallowed hook, line, and sinker a narrative that now I probably would be like, I might nibble that bait, but I'm not 100% sure that I certainly wouldn't go in hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah. Do you think there's a mix-up now of the positions of power between, not like Russia, China, Israel, us? We're always like these powerhouses, but now you're seeing big tech, and you're seeing the WEF, and you're seeing this weird transfer of power where it's blending, and all countries seem to be interconnected in this weird way through the intelligence agencies. What do you think about the nature of power right now, and who to be, I guess, paying attention to? When I see the Bill Gates, and you hear, at first you're like, I used to read all his book recommendations. And then during COVID, I started to go, this guy might be a maniac. You know what I mean? What do you think about some of this?
This guy might be a real life Dr. Evil.
Who is our real threat right now when it comes to power structures? And like, what do you think about the nature of power right now?
Yeah. So I think it's a fascinating question. I don't think power lies where people think that it lies. I think the whole Russia-Ukraine conflict has sort of exposed Russia as kind of a paper tiger. And that's not to say Russia still has a ton of nuclear weapons and they could end the world if they wanted to. But I think everybody saw, like, everybody expected Russia just to steamroll Ukraine, and they should have. On paper, with the amount of, forces and funding and all these different kind of things, it was like Russia was the other superpower for so long. And Ukraine is just kind of this tiny little country who now we are funding via proxy and is killing Russian soldiers with FPV drones, which is wild.
What does that mean? FPV drones?
They're the drones that
remote.
Basically, they're the remote drones that are flown with fiber optic cables, and then essentially they're attached to a kinetic payload. So it's like it's like throwing a grenade, except you can fly that grenade right into your enemy.
Yeah.
And it's a super low dollar, high impact type of weapon. Where a Hellfire missile might cost $800,000, an FPV drone might cost $1,000.
Wow.
Something like that, and to the same effect. And so now you have a country that would be vastly underfunded, but on a battlefield where it's sort of a 50-50, they're as capable as anything shy of like nuclear capabilities. They're as capable as the Russian military, and nobody saw that coming. Everybody 10 years ago, that would have been unfathomable, but now that's the nature of the conflict. So there's a power shift there. I think if you're looking at it from the ability to inflict economic and technical strategic impacts, Russia is not well positioned, but China is. I think China has uniquely positioned themselves as far as like control of certain minerals and mineral rights and mining rights in Afghanistan and the Congo and some of these other places. They're willing to use slave labor to achieve strategic objectives. They don't have a moral and ethical, I think, restraint that we do here. So they're willing to do things that we would see as being amoral or unethical, or certainly, when it comes to like green energy and those kind of things. China is one of the worst offenders as far as like polluting and stuff. And they just don't care because it's power. Getting them power through a less expensive means. Whereas, we in the West are like so worried about climate change and all these other kind of things, whatever you think about that. We're so concerned about that we're spending billions of dollars or hundreds of billions of dollars to come up with better solutions, cleaner energy, do all these different kind of things. In the meantime, China, India, and Pakistan are polluting most of the world.
Wow.
And they just don't care.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we'll get to the point of being the world hegemon from a power perspective, and then we'll worry about it. And so I think you see those things, and it's like that will always create an imbalance if we're fighting with one hand tied behind our back, or we have this ethical standpoint and we won't do certain things, and we won't use predatory lending in African countries to, install this infrastructure development or whatever. And China's like, Well, we will do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have sort of aggregated a lot of power, and they have positioned themselves well. I think one of the first things that Trump did when he got into office was, the tariffs and those kind of things, but also renegotiating just the overall trade agreements and trade structures that we have with China. We're not willing to be in a predatory trade agreement with China anymore. We're not willing to put ourselves at an underhanded position like we were for many, many years, essentially since like the Nixon administration forward, of saying, well, China is an up and coming developing country. And so we're going to give them favored nation trade status. We're going to give them advantageous trade agreements. We're going to give them this. We're going to give them that. We're going to fund their infrastructure development, all these different kind of things. And then we turn around and China's doing things like currency manipulation and manipulating the markets and, all those kind of things. And they're the world's largest consumer base because they have something like 1.6 billion people or something like that. So China, I think if we had to look at it from a standpoint of like who would be the main concern technologically, strategically, financially, China is currently that.
Okay.
But I think if you want to get a good perspective on a much, much more in depth and I think probably much smarter perspective than me, read Peter Zehan. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him as an author. He wrote a book that's fascinating to me called The End of the World is Just the Beginning.
Okay.
And then he wrote a book specifically about the United States called The Accidental Superpower.
What's his background? Like, is he just like a political war guy who studies it?
Yeah, not even political war. I think it's mostly just it's economics, it's history, it's politics, it's strategy, it's all these different kind of things. And pardon me, I don't know what he studied.
He just has some sort of ability to high level view and synthesize it all.
Yeah, and not only is he very intelligent, but he's able to explain, very intelligent and very well researched, but he's also able to explain it in a way that I think makes sense to the layperson, or maybe just above the layperson, let's say.
Okay.
But fascinating books. And he's got a couple of them. End of the World is Just the Beginning and The Accidental Superpower. He's also got one called Disunited Nations.
What do you mean? Or what did you get as a synthesis of End of the World is Just the Beginning? What does that even mean? So I'm going to hop into these books, but what did you get from that?
So the basic overview is this. The world trade structure as it currently exists is based on a model that was built up by U.S. naval power projection worldwide post-World War II.
Okay.
Everybody probably knows this, but all of the Asian countries and all of the Western European countries were decimated by World War II. The United States remained relatively untouched, except for our Pacific Fleet in Hawaii. So we were very uniquely positioned to become this world superpower. We had far and away, and not even close, we had the strongest Navy in the world. Via that power projection, naval power positioned us to be able to sort of regulate trade, international trade between all of the nations in the world and say, hey, all you other players, we're going to get along. We're going to have these shipping lanes. We're going to have these trade agreements. We're going to do things the right way. And we're not going to allow anybody to infringe on anybody else's rights to these free trade. And this sort of opened the world up post-World War II to this very unique situation that had never existed in the world before. Well, now what he means by the end of the world is, let's suppose that the United States decides we no longer want to be the regulatory body for this world trade agreement. We're not going to reinforce everybody's ability to trade freely. We're going to go to an America first sort of exclusive. We're going to take care of us. If you create that power vacuum, the world trade structure as it currently exists would fall apart.
Okay.
And so then you have to look at which countries are uniquely positioned to have their own infrastructure, their own manufacturing, their own, production, I think from all the way down to from raw mineral resources and these different kind of things and, food production, all those different kind of things, all the way through like high level technological production of certain, whether it's military equipment or computers or whatever, which countries have the ability to produce which things and which ones are just going to fall flat. Mm-hmm. The United States in that power vacuum would have the ability to produce almost everything here domestically.
Wow.
From raw resources all the way up through advanced technological developments and stuff like that. And not many other countries have anywhere near that. Certainly not the ones in Western Europe. China, not even close. And so you look at it, and the reason some of these other superpowers like China have been able to position themselves is because currently there's a trade structure that's reinforced by American force protection projection around the world.
So uncoupling that would be horrendous, though.
Catastrophic to most countries.
Okay.
Yep.
Even us in the beginning, right? Because we are so interconnected for all things like chips and everything, food. And it would take years, and there would be some form of collapse, or I would imagine it would be pretty horrendous.
And we've outsourced a lot of production to countries that will do it for cheaper, especially that like mid-level, like not super finite refinement of resources and production of chips and these different kind of things. And we've outsourced that to countries that can do it and will do it.
Yeah.
We would have the capability to do it, but certainly there would be a period of growing pain, I guess, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
But anyway, Peter Zeihan goes way, way more in depth. Shout out to Peter Zeihan.
Yeah, cool.
I don't endorse anybody's books, but I read them. They're fantastic. And I think it's worth reading those and then reading other books that provide other perspectives, because it is really like you can really get into sort of this doom and gloom idea of we're going to be elbowed out of our position as the world power hegemon, and we're sort of America's going to fall behind because of this thing or that thing. And I'm not saying that we should just like rest on our haunches and say, oh, we're uniquely positioned, we're going to do this great thing. I do still think that internally there are some things that we need to watch out for. I think that, this idea that people come to this country and we're a nation of immigrants and we should just allow all these people to come in. But the people that come in now aren't necessarily like, we're not talking about the Irish and Italian immigrants that came in turn of the century or whatever. Right now, we're talking about people that come to this country and openly advocate for the destruction of this country. We're talking about people that come in who have a belief system or a religious belief system that is incompatible with Western values.
Yeah.
And so those are things that I think you have to be not only cognizant of, and we are a nation that believes in religious freedom, but if you're coming here and you're saying my religion advocates for the downfall of the West, and I'm going to advocate for that religion here, well, at some point we have to say, hey, that's incompatible with Western life.
Right.
Move here and assimilate, or don't come here.
Yeah. Well, and it seems frustrating too for short terms, like 4 to 8 year terms, where you get certain things going in one direction and then they start to swing the other direction. And long live the thing that was going on behind it, which you could call the deep state or whatever you want to call these contracts between big corporations. And I don't understand at high level, but I can just see blanket statement that this thing is like a giant, well-organized machine with lots of funding. And a lot of it isn't in our interest. A lot of it just seems like there's going to be this weird next 10 years, Klaus Schwab, these guys, Soros, they have this thing called the Great Reset, and they're very open about it. It's transparent. They're not hiding it. It's not conspiracy. It's just, that's what their agenda is. And there's so much funding behind it that I'm concerned that we're going to be in some sort of Orwellian, Huxleyan, dystopian, weird technocracy. And nobody wants that. I mean, some people are believing in
Somebody
it.
Must want it.
They're drinking the Kool-Aid. A lot of people are drinking the Kool-Aid and going, this sounds great, What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I think probably the same thing that you think. And I think, it's super interesting because you mentioned two authors there, Orwell and Aldous Huxley, and Brave New World in 1984. Phenomenal books. And you look at those things and people think, well, those books were written decades ago by people who lived in turn of the century, post World War II. And they're talking about one of the things that Orwell talks a lot about is socialism in the UK. And so if you look at the New World Order and what they're talking about with Klaus Schwab and some of the WEF, they're talking about instituting a system of government that is essentially communist socialist, and not just making it single country specific, but sort of this blanket. And they're already installing it in the essentially the Western European nations.
And see how that's going.
And it's not going well. But what do they have to do in order to convince people that there is a crisis that's going to require them to install a government that can fix this crisis? And this is when you go back to like Yuri Bezmenov, when he defected from Russia and came over and was saying, there's this cycle of the way that we install ideas. You have to create a crisis, then you have to come in with the solution for this crisis, and then you have to sort of normalize this new solution, right?
And 20 years is what he said.
20 years.
To institutionalize.
Yep. You have to,
Demoralize.
You have to demoralize them first. You have to create this crisis. And so what's the crisis? The crisis is you bring over all of these disaffected people from these third world nations who are ardently and vehemently opposed to Western values. You bring them in, and then you say, now we need to fund them. We need to provide them. It's a humanitarian crisis. We need to provide for them. We need to give them all these different kind of things. Here's the crisis.
Yeah.
And you're like, realistically, the United States could do more good by keeping these people out of the United States, having sovereign power, and then being able to take that and help these nations out where they are.
Yeah.
Help these people stay in their own countries and make their countries better where they live, and allow us to go in and help you make your country better. If their countries weren't already ruined, they wouldn't want to come here.
Sure.
And so you create this crisis, you demoralize the people, then you tell them, well, all of this problem exists because of Western values. Instead of helping them understand that the only thing that can fix these problems is Western democratic constitutional Republican values. Like, that's the only fix. It's the only system, a meritocracy, a system of democracy where people have a vote. Like, those are the only kind of systems that actually work to bring people, to elevate people out of poverty and, put them in this system. For whatever reason, if it's consolidation of power or whatever it may be, the World Economic Forum and people like Klaus Schwab and George Soros have decided they want all of that power to be in the hands of just a few people. And certainly not a constitutional republic, because who controls the power in a constitutional republic? Each of the states, each of the sovereign states in that constitutional republic control their own power and their own destiny. That's the whole reason we have the Electoral College. It's the whole reason we have state delegates.
Yeah.
It's the only reason that the system works.
Yeah. And then you come up with things like climate change, where it's like, well, we're doing it for this reason. Or now I'm thinking, even, I don't know what your views are on aliens, or this seems to be in the last few years becoming mainstream, where a lot of super intelligent people from the military are starting to expose and disclose that, like, we have some form of super sophisticated machinery or aircraft, and we're seeing it, and it's becoming less stigmatized. But then you're like, all right, did we back engineer something and have advanced black op programs, and now we're going to use it to create some weird event that, like, big daddy government's going to save us? I always wonder what the next thing is to unite us, to make us also more susceptible to a smaller centralized power structure.
Yeah. And it's hard to say, and it is to sit here and theorize and say, yes, all of these things are happening. I think it's pretty evident that, like, the public is malleable, and we are prone to believe things that, and I think for a long time, and I don't say this as a criticism of anybody, for a long time, we were given to believe that the things our people in our elected officials in power are telling us is just objectively true.
Yeah.
Those are the people that know. The people that are reporting the news, those are the people who know. And somehow they have been given more information than we have, and we should just blanket believe what they say. I think for all its downsides, I think one of the things that social media has done is sort of expose the holes in the narrative of mainstream media.
Yeah.
That you're not being told the whole truth.
Yeah. You're
almost
being
never
told lies.
Then in fact, in large scale, you're being told just a bunch of lies with a little bit of truth sprinkled in there. And so I think it's the getting back to the idea of teaching kids in school not what to think, but how to think.
And discernment
and critical thinking. And let me present you with both sides of an argument and say, here are the facts of one side, and here's the facts of the other side, and these are facts. These are the things that we know. This is the data. Now you decide what you think about this data and how you choose to interpret it, and come up with a critical thinking type solution based on what you've seen, and then apply the scientific method and come up with a hypothesis based on the data, based on your conclusions, and then put that hypothesis through actual scientific rigor.
Yeah.
And not just coming and trying to come up with a solution that you want.
Yeah.
But actual scientific rigor, and then come out with more data and say, okay, yep, here is what is actually happening. Instead of that, I think more and more people are being told, it doesn't matter what data is shown to you. Here's what you should believe. It doesn't matter that you can observably see that, a person is thus and such. We're going to tell you that if this person tells you, it doesn't matter if you can see that I'm a man. If I tell you I'm a woman, that's what I am. And you're like, well, I don't think that's right.
Yeah, we're getting more into virtue signaling and the emotional element of conversation. I'd love to pivot into what you are doing now, some of your mission, and then also ask you a bit about like what your fiance's work is and what your exposure is to what psychedelic therapy can do for veterans, and maybe even your own personal experience, if any, with that.
Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier in the conversation, towards the tail end of my career, I saw a lot of my friends getting out and doing really compelling work in other different areas. And so as you're transitioning out of a high performing organization like Dev Group, there are a lot of opportunities that are presented to you. A lot of doors open up and people say, hey, would you want to do this? Hey, would you want to do this? And I linked up with a friend of mine. His name's Andrew Sullivan, Sully, and he had started in 2022 a nonprofit called Community First Project. The genesis of that was during our time in the SEAL teams, we would go and do training exercises in different cities, and we got to work a lot with local law enforcement. So they would help us set up training, or they would find buildings that we could use as like potential like target buildings. And so we build these relationships with these different departments. As a give back at the end of these training exercises, we would bring the cops in that worked with us, and we would run them through our trainings, kind of give them like, here's a scenario, here's an active shooter, here's a hostage situation, some of these very like critical incident, active shooter type things that they might see in their work, and give them this sort of very high level tactical training, give them some of our like tips and tools and things that we do, and allow us to train like a day or two with them. And I always really enjoyed that. Some of the guys would always make it a point to stay behind on those last few days and work with the cops. I was always one of those guys. And so as he retired, one of the things that we found was that, a lot of the people, the cops that get the training, the cops that have budgets like your full-time SWAT teams and stuff like that, they're already doing those things at a high level, right? They're already very tactically proficient. They're doing some of the things that we would do as far as, tactics wise and hostage rescue. But typically when a crisis incident happens, the SWAT team isn't the first on scene.
Right.
It's a patrol officer or a couple of patrol officers or whoever those squad cars that are in the area, they're going to respond to that. And it may be 20 or 30 or 40 minutes before you get an actual full-time SWAT team to get kitted up and respond to that. And so the shortfall there becomes you have these patrol level officers that aren't getting the requisite training, or they're getting a very, very minimal amount of this training. Typically 16 years is the standard, or 16 hours a year is the standard.
Just due to funding and politics and
just due to funding, and because somebody somewhere determined 16 hours of active shooter training per year is the minimum amount. That's what you have to have. And most people, due to department funding constraints, won't go beyond that minimum.
And these guys are probably craving more, but they just don't have access.
100%. And that's what we find is that not only there are a lot of people that are it's not everybody, but a lot of people are seeking additional training. A lot of people want to train at a higher standard than what the nationwide standard is, the alert standard it's called. And so they want to seek out this. And some of these cops are even paying out of pocket. They're buying their own gear.
Wow.
They're already not making a lot of money, but they're coming out of pocket to go train with these different training groups. And so Sully was like, well, here's a problem. Here's a solution. He's like, I'm going to start a nonprofit. We're going to go fundraise. We're going to take that money that we fundraise and we're going to go train the cops in the areas that we raise funding.
Cool.
And so I think in the 3 years from 2022 until now, we've raised just under $3 million. I think that number's amazing. Correct. Yeah. And we've been able to train in the neighborhood of about 1,500 law enforcement professionals.
Wow.
With that. And those are your patrol level officers who otherwise would not have been afforded the opportunity to come get this training. The training that we provide is a 5-day, 40-hour curriculum. So essentially 40 hours, you're giving them almost what they would get in 3 years of the minimum standard.
Wow.
And you're giving them the training that we would train at the highest level of our nation's tier 1 units.
That's amazing. And you fly to them to do this?
And we fly to them. Yeah, we fly to them to do it. So, the week, I guess, prior to me coming out here, we were in Austin, Texas, working with another great foundation out there, the George Pastor Foundation, that helps us fundraise in the state of Texas. We did a training with Austin PD and Round Rock PD. Prior to that, we've done trainings in Florida this year, trainings in Massachusetts, trainings in Virginia, trainings in Connecticut. And so we kind of go all over. Now that I'm retired and I'm moving out to Colorado, now we're looking at training more in Colorado, Utah, here in Arizona, New Mexico.
And are you always recruiting new guys that are leaving Special Forces?
Yeah, and that's pretty much the thing. All of our instructors come from development groups. So as they retire, as they move out of their careers, typically what we'll do is we'll reach out, and anybody that wants to come train, we'll bring them out. We put them under like just a 1099 contract. They come out and they do instructor work for us. And some guys will do many courses. Some guys will do one or two and then go on to another career or something like that. But
cool.
It helps in a couple of ways. Number one, obviously, it helps the law enforcement get the training that they need without having to come out of pocket. Number two, it helps, I think, guys transitioning from the military feel that sense of they get to continue the mission. They get to continue that sense of community. They get to work with guys they worked with in the SEAL teams.
Yeah.
So it's been great for me, I think, from both a professional standpoint, morale standpoint, and then also from a mental health standpoint. I get to continue feeling like I'm serving, like I'm doing the most good, like, the mission continues in that sense.
I love that. And what are your views on the psychedelic for mental health movement?
Yeah. So,
and have you done any?
I haven't done any personally.
Yeah.
But the thing is, again, as I was sort of tail ending my career, I hadn't heard much about it until probably 2020 or 2021. And I think it sort of has gained a lot of momentum in recent years. And there's a number of reasons for that. One, primarily because there was, vets within Marcus and Amber Capone and the work that they're doing. And then them tying in with like the Mission Within, which was taking guys down to Mexico and doing Ibogaine and 5-MeO DMT. And so these guys would come back. And so sometimes guys who preceded me in retirement, sometimes you knew these guys were struggling with some issues or going through some mental health stuff or struggling with booze or pills or any of those kind of things. And then you wouldn't see them for a few months, and then maybe they would go do a treatment and come back, and then you'd run into them. And there was, at least from my perspective, a visible change in some of these people. And so I would run into former coworkers and I would be like, wow, there's something different here with you, and they would say, oh, I went down and I was with vets and we went down and did this Mission Within. And without getting too much into the details of what they had done, they just said, I went through this psychedelic therapy and it changed me.
Yeah.
And I come from a background of my father was a mental health professional. My brother's a mental health professional from a clinical standpoint. And so you see people go through years of counseling, years of trying to kick addiction recovery stuff, or going to clinics and doing these different things, or years and years, decades in AA or whatever, with varied results, but oftentimes a little bit lackluster.
Yeah.
And then to see somebody who's really struggling, really going through a hard time, go down and do a psychedelic therapy or go down and do, Mission Within or some of these other different things that are available, psilocybin or ketamine. And then to see them from like 1 month to the next, kick a years long alcohol or pill addiction, come back from the precipice of self-harm, start rebuilding relationship with loved ones and significant others. And you're thinking, you see so many of these cases and you hear about some of these cases and you think there has to be something to this, right? This isn't just a bunch of people anecdotally reporting, oh yeah, I went down, I did this thing and now I feel better.
Right.
It's like legitimately people making life changes, or people coming back who had been struggling with addiction to painkillers or something like that for years, and sometimes silently suffering, but maybe you knew about it. And then all of a sudden they're like, haven't touched those since and I won't touch them again. And you're like, people just don't kick addiction like that. It's typically not how it happens. And so it became, very curious about some of these things. And a lot of it was in the mental health space, right? Is guys coming out and sometimes not even outwardly really displaying any symptoms of seeming like they were going through any type of PTSD or any type of mental health, suicidal ideation. And maybe you just didn't know about it. And then you would see them and they would be like, they would say, hey, I went through this therapy. I did this journey. They call them a lot of times journeys. I went through the psychedelic journey. And, I really was suffering and my marriage was falling apart and I was thinking about killing myself. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Wow. Yeah.
And so not only does it create this area of where they're able to heal, but it also kind of, I feel like, creates an openness to them being able to share things that kind of seem taboo.
Yeah.
Guys in our lines of work aren't willing to come out and say like, man, I'm really going through it.
Yeah.
I'm really having a hard time. I'm really suffering with this, or I've been thinking about hurting myself or whatever. People just aren't open about that for a number of reasons.
Yeah. It cracks that vulnerability.
And so now not only are they fixing themselves or going down and getting this treatment that they need, but they're willing to come back and have these very candid conversations with people who maybe also are needing to hear this stuff.
Yeah.
And say, you know what, I am too. And I wasn't going to talk about it. I didn't want to tell anybody, because there's this stigma that if you're not okay, if your mental health isn't okay, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
But I feel like probably the opposite is true, right? Which is if your mental health is okay, if you've gone through all of these things and your mental health is 100% fine, you are the exception, not the rule.
Exactly.
Right. And so I think destigmatizing it, allowing people to have these conversations, and then showing them like there is help available, and it doesn't involve years and years of counseling and, sitting through therapy or going to alcohol and addiction recovery programs, inpatient programs.
Yeah.
But, it's not to say that you don't do the work, right? And that's what Deanne does. You mentioned Deanne, my fiance, is what she does is the integration portion of that, the preparation and integration for people going through these therapies, which I think increases, and I don't have the data, but increases the efficacy of those therapies exponentially.
Yeah.
Right. As you go down, you have this transformative experience with these psychedelic, these plant medicines, and you come back and you have somebody to help you and say, to coach you through this, like, here's what you experienced.
Yeah.
Let's apply this to all of the different areas of your life that may not be, and maybe they're not even suffering, but maybe suboptimal.
Yeah.
Right. You're just not optimized in the things that you're doing. Maybe you're not able to, perform at the level you want to at work, or maybe you're not sleeping as well as you should, or maybe you're struggling with your wife and kids, people, you just can't connect with people. And so there's all sorts of different expressions of what PTSD and traumatic brain injury and these things do.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of different medicines, and each of them can be applied differently.
Yeah.
To these different things. And then you sort of have this, very candid, and from the feedback that I've gotten, this very like, I think it's sort of gonna blow up that whole industry in the sense of like really exposing it large scale. Is that documentary that just came out on Netflix, the In Waves and War?
Yeah, I keep hearing it's good.
Yeah, and I haven't seen it myself, but I know that the three of the guys who were involved in the documentary, and have known those guys most of my careers, good guys. And getting to see them in that, and it is from everything I'm told, super candid, very in depth, does a very good job of explaining what the medicines are and what they do, and how these guys sort of experience these different journeys, and how it fixed them. And I know that those guys, to one degree or another, were all suffering quite a bit at the end of their careers with some mental health stuff and physical stuff, and just processing everything that they went through.
It'd be cool to see
super
it
interesting.
to where before you could do it for active duty in the future, where you destigmatize it enough to where it could be preventative instead of waiting until the tail end where it's at that point and suffering, hopefully, if it's something that is promising in that way.
Yeah. And I think it probably is. I think that's the toughest nut to crack, is being able to say like, hey, here's something that's a psychotropic medicine that we're going to administer to active duty servicemen and women, or law enforcement professionals or first responders, and then expect the next day or 2 days later to give them like a gun and go forward and be able to do these things. So
it is interesting because it might disarm them. A lot of times psychedelics or cannabis, even things like this, I think they're powerful tools, but they can disarm you because they make you completely disrupt what you were thinking and question everything about yourself and others.
Yeah,
and
for
so
sure.
Is that a good idea or not? We better be careful because we are tampering with consciousness.
Yeah, and I think that's where the conversation is probably going to stick at with the active duty people. But I also think there is, if somebody is suffering that much to where they would need like a psychedelic medicine or something like that,
the risk reward.
I think there is there just should be a mechanism to be like, hey, if you're in this bad of a situation, step away from the service, get treatment, save your life, save your relationship. There are things that are more important than doing a full 20-year career or stuff like that. I think it's coming through those things on the other side with your mental health and your important relationships intact is, I think, more important than just putting your head down and grinding out a difficult career,
Mm-hmm.
But every person individually, I think, has to make that call for themselves.
Mm-hmm. What inspires you right now or gives you hope for your own life and your own trajectory and the country and the future of humanity?
So there's a lot.
There's
a lot to that question. Yeah, small to big. I think for myself, I've always been sort of just an optimist. I think, when I look at my own life and the things I'm doing, I'm optimistic about. I really enjoy the work I do with law enforcement. Some of the things that we want to do on our property in Colorado, as far as like hosting veteran retreats or coaching retreats or even like corporate retreats and bringing people out.
Cool.
I'm passionate about sharing the knowledge, whether that's tactical knowledge or leadership knowledge with people that I get to run into. I do some corporate public speaking, some of these podcasts. And so I'm really enjoying that. I think this era of being able to share some of the knowledge that I've accrued, and I feel incredibly fortunate to have gotten to do all of the things that I got to do for 22 years. So the ability to be able to share that with people and sometimes see people have that light bulb moment.
Cool.
That to me is great. A lot of what gives me hope, I guess, or faith in the nation, our ability to rise as a nation, is I think you do see this sort of like resurgence of values, of this value system that's sort of coming back around. I think you find a lot of people now, more so I think than any time in my recent memory, reconnecting with their faith, with whatever that faith may be. For most of the people that I know, it's Christianity, but sort of retouching with their faith, finding those foundational values that I think the way that I was raised, that my life was sort of built up around those things. Everything from my relationships to my family to my patriotism to my belief in the divine inspiration of our country. All of that came from the foundational faith-based values that I was raised with. So to find people who are re-engaging with their faith now in large scale, I think that's great. Even the up and coming generations, I think, unfortunately, before he passed, I think Charlie Kirk was doing tremendous work with getting people to sort of re-engage with their faith and to re-engage with that sort of like open, two-sided conversation, even though sometimes it can be a little bit harsh, a little bit vitriolic. I think having an open dialogue between the two sides of the aisle, I think that gives me a lot of faith. And then, in my work with law enforcement, seeing people who continue to want to sign up and serve their communities, that to me has always been something that, as long as there are people who care enough about their communities, about their state, about their, their nation, as long as there are people who care enough about those things to continue to sign up and continue to want to serve, I think that is speaks volumes about the possible future for our country. I think people continuing to care enough to say, this is whatever's going on right now, this is worth saving. Our community is worth rebuilding, building up, sustaining. Our country is worth, our foundational values and our Constitution, it's worth fighting for. And I still believe that, even though some of those fights may have been based on not all the truth.
Sure.
But it is certainly, I think, worth serving. And then, people finding resonance with the values of faith and gratitude and service and caring, and whether that's in the vein of helping people deal with the things that they've been through psychedelic therapies, or law enforcement, first responder training, or just serving in your community or whatever capacity that is. I think those things give me a lot of hope. And that's not to say there aren't days that I look around and I'm like, we live in a world full of idiots and there's a bunch of really dumb stuff happening. But hopefully that's the minority and not the majority.
No, I'm even seeing an increase in these younger men that are coming up, and they're a bit turned off by what they're seeing from the generation before that got swept into social media and whatever it is. And they're doing jujitsu and they're tough, and there's a resurgence of a healthy masculinity coming forward. Even the younger firefighters, there's a bunch of new guys coming on. They're so healthy. They're so disciplined, and they're so interestingly smart. They're smarter.
They're smart.
They're way more intelligent. And so I'm seeing a really cool shift happening, and it's inspirational. So,
And when it's everything from like, people in the last 3 or 4 years, I've had more people ask me for book recommendations. I'm an avid reader. I love books.
Yeah.
And I've had more people ask me, hey, what's a great book? What's the last good book you read? Or give me book recommendations, which I think is tremendous. I think some of like the positive masculinity movement, and you have these sort of like bastions of positive masculinity. You have your Jordan Petersons and you have your Joe Rogans, and you have these guys who are speaking out, who are saying like what it is to be masculine is not toxic.
Right.
It's maybe the most healthy expression of what a man is healthy masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
It's guys that want to serve. It's the guy that is going to carry people out of a burning building. It's guys who are willing to charge headfirst into the fray in defense of freedom and our national values. And I think those kind of things need to be cultivated, need to be reinstilled. And I think, for me, like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, my cousin who was a Marine during Desert Storm, I hadn't really thought seriously about, I was 11 years old when Desert Storm happened. I hadn't really thought seriously about military service. And he came home, I remember it was like in 1992 or maybe 93.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I was there in Colorado, and he came and he sat with me on my back porch, and he talked to me about, here was his experience in Iraq during this war. And, we got rid of Saddam, or we deposed Saddam, or fought this war that was, very limited scale. But I remember hearing his experiences and just thinking, man, this dude is the most badass dude. This is a guy that I want to emulate. My cousin's about 10 years older than me.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought, here's a guy that I want to model myself after, whether it's military service or not. I was like, here is a guy who is doing it right. It's like, he's strong, he's tough, he's willing to go forward and fight for these things. He believes in America. And then, he came home and got out of the Marine Corps a few years later and ended up going into law enforcement. Now he's a cop in Texas. And always had a tremendous amount of admiration for him, but having strong male role models and these people who step forward, and hopefully, somebody listens to this podcast and is able to say, being a positive male role model is not just about, it is about being strong and being tough and being willing to serve, but it's also about strengthening your mind. It's also about, embracing these values of service. It's also about reading books, exploring both sides of a conversation, thinking, both introspectively and critically, and being able to like be a well-rounded individual, study the Stoic virtues, read good books, and be the best, most well-rounded, strong version of positive masculinity that you can be, and be an example in your community, be an example in your country.
Yeah. Is there any favorite books, if you had 5 to give away, that you could say you would want to have like 5 extras of to hand them out?
Oh man. Well, one of the books that I always recommend is a book called Legacy by James Kerr. It's about the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team and their culture of success and how they became successful. Cool. And a lot of the values that you see in there are what I would call values of like positive masculinity, cool. Service above self and team above self and those kind of things. I think a book that I've read recently that I really like is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Great Tremendous book. I think it's something that from just a individual helping yourself kind of standpoint, I think that's great. The end of the world is just the beginning. The book I mentioned by Peter Zihan. I think that is a good, or any of the books really by Peter Zihan, I think are all great, but cool. It gives you this very well-rounded perspective of like the history of how we got to be where we are, the present, where we are and why we're here, and then maybe the future of where we're going.
I want to read those.
Great book. I think there's a book by Nicholas Nassim Taleb called Anti-Fragile.
Okay, I've heard of it.
That is an amazing book. All of his books are very good. He wrote one called The Black Swan about unanticipated events in the world, how those things change the way we shape the ideas about the things that happen. But Anti-Fragile talks about basically being resilient or being, not shattered by these things that happen in our lives, but being able to like take on board the hardships and the things that we go through and being able to process those and come out okay on the other side, just being resilient.
Yeah.
And then probably Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Great book.
Or Letters from a Stoic by Seneca.
I love that.
I think those two are some of my favorite books. And then from an analytical standpoint about Stoic values, I think if you read any of the books by Ryan Holiday, I think all of those are very good.
Yeah.
So that's probably
cool.
Not a comprehensive list, but there's books
Ryan
to start
Holiday.
with. He's great.
Yeah, he makes it digestible and
Yep.
Cool. Well, if you were going to die today, is there anything you'd want to share with the world?
Yeah, a lot of things. Yeah, I think, one of the things that has been a constant touch point in my life, something that I always come back to, is the ability to, whether things are hard or easy, whether things are going really well for you or you're kind of down in the dumps, find things to be grateful for. I think gratitude is one of the most powerful concepts, principles that we have in our life. And like I said, I lived in Brazil for 2 years, and I saw people who had nothing.
Yeah.
And I mean nothing. They lived on dirt floors and tin shacks, and they were grateful. They
Yeah.
were happy. They were able to go out there, and it wasn't about comparing their life to anybody else's life. It was about being grateful for the things that they had, the gifts that they had, and being able to find that gratitude in abject poverty.
Yeah.
When I came home and you realize that we live in a land of opulence,
Yeah.
everybody has everything they could want at their fingertips, and people
Mhm.
still find reasons to complain because my life isn't as good as that person's.
Mhm.
Throw that stuff away, cast that stuff aside, find reasons to be grateful for the relationships that you have, cultivate those relationships, be grateful for the opportunities that you have, and then work hard to earn those opportunities, right? Be grateful for the country that you live in and find ways to serve.
It's amazing. Dude, I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
It's an honor connecting with you.
Likewise.
Yeah.
No.
Cool, brother.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it and subscribe to the show and rate the show. That helps people to discover it. And enjoy the next episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination of some sort.